Hey, what's up guys, James Diamond here and welcome back to the next episode of my Uplifting Trance video tutorial series here on Sonic Academy. In the last episode we looked at creating and processing our kick drum, and in this episode we're going to be looking at probably the second or one of the other most important parts of your mix, which is the sub bass. Getting your sub bass fitting perfectly with your kick is really important to help the track, the low ends gel together and for it to all kind of sound natural. So we're going to be looking at how we're actually going to go about doing this. And as you would have seen and heard in the kind of intro and playthrough, this is an uplifting trance track mixed with a bit of psytrance, and the psytrance element is going to come from the bass line, the sub bass, so it's going to be a very typical psytrance bass line. In order to do that, we're going to create this from scratch, and we're going to be using the synth Sylenth 1. So I've got this preloaded here. This is just the kind of standard patch when you load up Sylenth 1, and what we're going to do, we're going to clear this patch by clicking on menu, and then go into preset and hit clear. The next thing, we're just going to add in our notes. So we're going to be using the kind of typical psytrance rolling bass line, using the 3/16, so that's the second, third and fourth 16th, and the next bunch and the next bunch. Let's just reduce the length of the third 16th, and then we are working in the key of E, so I'm just going to change this to E. So that's your standard kind of patch, but I'm going to drop it down a couple of octaves. Think about there is where we want it. So first of all, let's have a look at how we're going to create this sound. I'm going to add 8 voices for the first patch. Keep the volume as it is, and we're going to knock the phase up a little bit. And then add a little bit of detune. Obviously you can hear that the more detune you add, the kind of more wobbly the sound gets. We're keeping the waveform as the sawtooth, and then on the next one we're going to add a pulse wave. This is going to be used for the kind of low end. Forgot, just need to add one voice. That's sounding quite nice. Now let's go over to our filter section, and we're going to add a low pass. Keep the input select on A, and let's have a look what this sounds like now. So nothing special, it's not really the sound we're looking for. We want to kind of create that kind of traditional plucky Moog bass line that is used a lot in Psy. So let's go ahead down to the modulation envelope settings here, and let's connect this to cutoff A, and let's move the modulation amount all the way to full, and let's have a listen to what it sounds like now. Still not quite there, we need to then change the cutoff. Pull those down a little bit, and let's now control the amount of kind of modulation on the cutoff. Pull the sustain all the way down and the decay up a tiny bit. Sounding a bit more like it, and let's have a play around with the filter controls to get it sounding nice and snappy. So I'm wanting that kind of mid-range between before the kind of sound opens up too much and goes into that kind of open sawtooth sound. I want to keep it kind of closed up. I'm just going to pull down the amp envelope and again pull up the sustain. So I'm going to pull down on the sustain and pull up on the decay. Makes it a little bit more snappy, and I'll play around with the filters again, and let's have a look at the resonance as well. Small amount of drive, pull up the resonance. Resonance is just kind of cleaning up the sound and a little bit of extra high. Obviously, the more that you add, the more kind of squelchy it sounds. So I'm liking the sound of that at the moment. Let's go ahead and add just a tiny bit of distortion. I don't want to add too much, I just want to kind of drive the sound a little bit more. About there, sounds good. Now let's just add some EQ. One thing to note is, even when I turn on the EQ itself, it's got some kind of built-in settings that boost the sound automatically. We're going to keep the mode on 1 pole, so if I just turn this on and off, you'll see what I mean. So even without actually changing any settings, it's adding a bit more kind of low and some high into it. It's losing a bit of the mid, so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to add a bit more high in. I'm going to change the frequency to about 6,000 hertz, and then I'll pull up on the treble. So that's sounding pretty nice indeed. Liking the sound. Nice and plucky, that kind of typical psytrance bass line. So what you want to do now is I'm going to render out that sound. So I'm just going to delete the rest of these 16th notes. Make this the size of 2 16th notes just to make sure we get the full amount of sound. Now let's go into our playlist, add our sub MIDI, and then you're just going to highlight all of this MIDI area, and then you want to go to export wave file. Make sure it's in 16 or 24 bit, and then put it into your project folder, and you should end up with something like this. Pretty damn close to what I created just then. So you drop it into your folder and then put it into the project. Just give it the color. We're finished now with this sub bass here, so we can turn that off. And now let's link it to our sub channel. As you can see, I've got the sounds the plugins preloaded. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to add in our 16th notes once again. And I'll just play this very, very quickly because there's a couple of things that we need to do before we get into the processing bit. I'm going to play this very shortly because there's going to be a little bit of a glitch. So as you can hear, it was kind of re-triggering the sounds. Sorry if that got a little bit loud there. Didn't sound very nice at all. I'm not sure why it does this, but in order to get rid of this glitch, all you have to do is hit use loop points off and then put it back on again. Just turn this down. So now it's not kind of re-triggering at a strange rate. It's re-triggering only when the MIDI notes allow it to. There's another kind of glitch that when you render something out in FL Studio and put it back in, it doesn't actually change the pitch of the sample within the sampler. So I'll just kind of play this and move the notes up and down. So usually that would actually change the pitch of the sample. For some reason it doesn't, but in order to kind of change this, you can go to the time stretch in here, right click on time and just hit none. And now we can change the pitch. Let's go in, and it's kind of a bit flat and a bit straight at the moment, so let's just decrease the volume of the first note of the kick, of the sub. And let's have a listen to this. And the reason I'm doing that is adding a little bit more groove. And if you remember to the first episode of the kick drum, we wanted the kick to kind of last for only 2/16 notes, which is this first two notes here. And then for the kick to kind of stop, for it to be very short and snappy, to allow these two, the third and fourth 16th notes, to kind of play through a little bit more, so they don't kind of clash with the low end of the kick. So now we've got our kind of MIDI setup. Let's have a look at what we're going to be doing for the processing. So first of all, I've got the virtual channel here, which is by Slate Digital, and this is pretty much exactly the same as the virtual mix bus, whereas the virtual mix bus is for, as it says, for mix buses and for master kind of outputs. This is for individual channels. Works exactly in the same way, that it's got your 5 different kind of console settings, and I'll just flick through them so you can hear what they sound like. Very, very minute differences, but it will make a difference in the end. It's just adding that little bit extra kind of characteristics from one of the consoles. If you could hear in the Brit N, which I believe is a kind of replication of the SSL, the Neve kind of console desk, it adds a lot of low end. This can be useful for some sounds. I think with this sound in particular, there's quite a lot of low end already, so we don't need to add too much. I'm not actually sure what this kind of Trident looking one, which console that's meant to replicate, but I find that adds a little bit of low end and a little bit of high as well. It just kind of cleans up the sound. So next up, before we get into the actual EQing part, I just want to play around with the instrument properties within the sampler. I want to make the sounds a little bit shorter. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to pull every single setting down. Because if you remember, if I pull and just drag and drop this sound into the playlist, you can see that it's 2/16 long. We want to make sure that it's only 1/16 long. So in order to do that, I pulled every single setting down, and then we're just going to pull the sustain all the way up to the top. What that means, that now the MIDI will only play the sample for as long as the MIDI is actually playing. So if I do the very, very short one, it plays it for only 1/16. If I pull it to 2/16, which was how long the sample was originally, you can hear that it's actually playing the full sample. So now we've pulled the sustain all the way up, and everything else, all the other kind of envelopes all the way down. It means that we can control exactly how long we want the sub bass to play for. So for example, I could make these a lot shorter. So we want to find a nice kind of medium. We'll come back to this after we've added some extra EQ and things. So that's exactly what we're going to do now. We're going to add some EQ. And in order to do the EQ here, I want to make sure that I'm EQing the exact frequencies of our root note, which is an E. So I'm just going to pop over to the internet, and we're going to be looking at the physics of musical notes. So this is pretty much tells you the exact frequency of every single note. So we're looking for the frequency, the main frequency of the kind of sub, which is going to be around 60 to say 110 hertz, depending on which key you're in. We're working on E, which is 82.41 for the E2, the low E2. So I'm going to go to my EQ, and I'm going to go exactly to 82, or as close as I can get it. There we go, that's 82. And I'm just going to reduce the Q band to make it nice and small, and I'll start pulling up on the EQ. So that's starting to sound quite nice, so you can really hear that low end frequency improve and kind of push through in the mix. Just going to go back to the score sheet here, and we're going to go to the next octave up, which is E3, and it's 164. It works that each octave is double of the previous frequency, so 82.41, double that, and there's 164.81, or at least it rounds it. So we need 164. And just like we did in the kick drum, we're going to be looking for, this is the kind of resonant frequency of the sub. It's a frequency that we want to focus on the low end. We don't want to focus on this kind of mid-range, kind of woody, kind of hollow kind of sound. So I'm going to do exactly the same, pull the Q band sharp. And there you go, you can hear that high octave straight away. So I'm just going to pull back on that. And what that's going to do, if I pull it down by a couple of dB, it's going to allow the low end to come through a little bit more. That's sounding pretty nice. And just like with the kick drum, you don't even notice it until you've actually started to pull it out. So let's go along to our span, and on our master channel, and we're going to change the modes to high res so we can have a look at exactly what it looks like. So as you can see, we've got our frequencies popping up and down. This is our main low E octave. This was our higher E octave that we just reduced. And with a lot of kind of synths, they produce these additional harmonics, these additional notes, which aren't actually in the key of what note we're playing. So we're in E, yet you can see this note that I'm highlighting now is B2, and is at 120 Hertz. So I'm just going to go back to my second EQ, and I'm going to go to 120 Hertz. So let's move this one out of the way. And again, I'm going to make the band quite small, and I'm going to pull back on this kind of resonant frequency, this rogue frequency. So as we can hear, that's kind of helping the low ends just be a little bit more defined and getting rid of that kind of muddy section of the bass. Next up, we're going to be using the BX sub filter, which is pretty much, it's just a low end boost. This is a free plugin that I grabbed again from Plugin Alliance. Absolutely amazing. I've been using it every single track since I grabbed it, and this is what I'm going to use to kind of really give the low end a boost. It's quite interesting the way that it works is that it's a filter as well as a booster. So it works in the way that you would use a low cut and add a resonance kind of section to it, like this. But as you move the low cut, the resonance moves with the filter. So I'm going to set the resonance to low, as that seems to be the kind of most smooth, and then I'm going to pull up on the tight punch, and as you can see, that chooses your frequency. Watch on the Voxengo span how the frequencies change, and you can see and hear what's boosted. So as you can see, the more that I pull up on the tight punch, the less kind of super low end. So it's actually cutting that low end, and it's also boosting the frequencies above it. So I'll just pull the volume down and pull this up and down, and look at the Voxengo span here. So as you can see, all of the low end is kind of being chopped off, as well as boosting that nice kind of 80 Hertz frequency. You don't always have to set this to the same frequency as your lowest frequency in your sub, as it sometimes can sound a bit odd. We just want to kind of get rid of a lot of these low end frequencies while boosting everything above it. So as you can hear, that's made a hell of a difference. It's really kind of helping that low end frequency to come through. So before we go any further, let's just insert this with our kick and see how it sounds into the playlist. Sound quite nice at the moment. That low end is working really nicely with the low end of the kick. They're not kind of clashing, getting in the way, as we shortened up the kick to make sure that didn't happen. The only thing that's missing is really just a bit of kind of high and mid, as it sounds a little bit kind of too much on the low end at the moment. So I'm going to add one final EQ, and we're just going to boost the mid-range. So as you can hear, that makes quite a big difference. Because we've added so much low end with using the BX sub filter, we need to kind of compensate and add a bit more of the mid range in there, just to make sure it has that mid drive. One last thing that I'm going to do is just add a tiny bit of compression, and this is really just going to help tighten up that low end just a little bit more. I'm going to have the release as quick as possible, a 3 millisecond attack, and we're going to change between maybe the soft setting or the 2:1 ratio. I think that sounds quite good like that. Let's just try the soft one. Not too much of a difference. I think 2:1 should work. And basically what that's doing is just compressing just a tiny little amount, and it's kind of in the future when the sub bass changes with the main melody and the chord progression, just to make sure that each kind of each note stays pretty much as level with the last chord progression. So before we end, let's just have a listen to the sub bass with all the effects on and all of them off to see what we've done. It's quite a big change. I'm noticing that maybe we could do with a little bit more high. That sounded really nice to me. A pretty cool sub, kind of psy-trance sub bass line. That's it for this episode. Next one, we're going to be looking at the mid bass lines. I'll see you then. Cheers.